Understanding Gender Diversity in Children and Youth. Welcome to Lesson 4, Gender Policy Issues, and how we can recognize and advocate for supportive policies for gender diverse children and youth. In this lesson, we will survey current issues, laws, and policies impacting gender diverse people in the United States. We'll evaluate the impact of these laws and policies, particularly on children and students, and we'll consider steps we can take to advocate for more supportive policies. The first thing to consider is that when we look at the laws and policies that are anti-trans, we see a geography of exclusion. In this graphic, you can see that the states colored gray had anti-trans legislation proposed throughout 2024. The orange-colored states are states that passed multiple anti-trans laws. Throughout the continental United States, anti-trans legislation and laws are introduced throughout the country. The rise of anti-trans exclusionary laws around the United States are a series of efforts to legalize discrimination. In the first 5 months of 2025, over 800 bills had been proposed and presented in almost all state legislatures. In this second graph, you can see how the amount of proposed anti-trans laws has increased drastically over the last few years. These bills are constantly tracked by the ACLU, and you can check their website to see the latest accumulation of policies and laws. This final graph shows the focus of most of these proposed laws. You can see that issues including bathroom usage, healthcare, sports, and education continue to be primary targets of this legislation. The societal push in the United States against queer and gender diverse children and youth is very organized. This organized disinformation can be found in publications from conservative think tanks and policy organizations. For example, Project 2025, the framework used by the government beginning in the 2025 term, contains organized plans to eliminate civil rights protections for people who are gender nonconforming. Authors of this disinformation use tactics such as language like the term gender ideology to imply that gender identity is a coerced belief system, accusing teachers of grooming students when the teachers honor their own identities, considering gender identity and/or sexual orientation as, quote, social contagions, and promoting state legislation that discriminates against gender-expansive youth and their families in public spaces, healthcare, and acknowledgement of their very existence. Just these few headlines show the constant efforts to increase the legalized discrimination of gender-expansive children, youth, and their families. One of the many areas that discriminatory legislation and policies target are people's right to use restrooms and their right to privacy. Concerns about bathroom use by gender diverse youth are at an all-time high. This has come with an escalation of violence and hundreds of legislative bills that target children, youth, their caregivers, and the privacy of gender diverse humans. Concerns about allowing people to use the bathroom that makes them feel safe and is congruent with their identity are based on perceived dangers. The objections to people using the restroom that matches their identity revolve around two main false beliefs and fears. The first is safety. This fear assumes that gender diverse people are a danger to others in the restroom. Here are the actual facts. Transgender and gender-expansive people have been using public bathrooms since there have been public bathrooms. Policies that allow transgender and gender-expansive people to use the bathroom that is in congruence with their identity do not legalize harassment, stalking, violence, or assault. Those behaviors are and will continue to be illegal for anyone, anywhere. And third, no cities, school districts, or states that already protect rights to use bathrooms have seen any rise in incidents of harassment or violence, or of anyone pretending to be transgender in order to access bathrooms. The second issue is privacy. This fear assumes the privacy needs of every other person will disappear solely because a trans or gender expansive person is present in the restroom. Here are the actual facts. Transgender and gender expansive people also want privacy in bathrooms, and they use the bathroom for the same reason as everyone else, to do their business and leave. All people prefer more privacy to less. Stall doors in bathrooms provide this for all folks. In the end, when we think about bathroom issues and policies that are inclusive, we like what Aidan Key, the author of Trans Children in Today's Schools, says: all humans should use the facility that works best for them. So when we think about what restrooms are for and how we can design inclusive policy, what if going to the restroom wasn't about this, binary gender divisions, or about this, even signs that indicate gender-neutral restrooms, but rather simply about what you do in the restroom? How we go about creating policies for our communities might create more belonging as we consider how to provide bathroom access to all diverse humans. Sports, particularly youth sports, is another area where anti-trans policies and legislation have grown. When people express fear about gender-diverse kids participating in sports, what are they really trying to protect? Important facts to remember. Arguments about whether gender-expansive students should be allowed to play sports always focus on what might happen, rather than the reality of what is happening. K-12 athletes have not dominated their sports. Like all kids, they win some and they lose some. Transgender athletes make up a tiny fraction of overall athletes. The NCAA says that there are fewer than 10 transgender college student athletes among 510,000 athletes total. Research shows states that include transgender participation have more girls participating in sports than states with bans. There is no evidence that transgender athletes are barriers to girls in sports. Athletes come in all shapes and sizes and have diverse variations in advantage in their sport. And finally, sports and participation in all kinds of extracurricular activities can create belonging for all kinds of children. Let's briefly talk about Title IX civil rights protections for students. Title IX was written and passed by Congress in 1971 to amend Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which prohibits sex and gender discrimination in the workplace, but it did not at the time address education. The 37 words of Title IX say that, quote, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." In 2020, the Supreme Court decided 6-3 in the case Bostock versus Clayton County that the language of Title IX encompasses gender because it, quote, "unambiguously protects discrimination based on sex." This caused the civil rights under Title IX to expand to include gender-diverse students in its protections. However, it is important to note that since February 2025, the federal government has tried to redefine the meaning of Title IX using executive orders. The executive orders define Title IX protections based on biological sex, in the words of the executive order, not the words of Title IX. The policy also uses, quote, protection of women and girls as the basis for removing gender-inclusive language from civil rights protections of all students. So now that we have an idea of the way that laws are being proposed and passed that discriminate against gender-diverse children, youth, and their families, what are some ways that we can advocate for more inclusive policies? Here are some basic ideas that we can consider. Acknowledge that it takes courage for any child to take risks, try new things, participate in activities or competitions, or just navigate the world every day. Making sure there are diverse opportunities for kids to try out makes room for belonging for all kids. Work to have visible role models for kids. Make sure kids see stories of diversity like men on cheer teams, Black women playing tennis, a champion wrestler who is missing an arm, or other visible role models who exhibit the possibilities of diverse talents and skills. Make sports and other activities inclusive by providing children the right to participate. Giving children an opportunity to build personal dignity, a feeling of safety, and an understanding of their own potential is incredibly powerful. If you would like to read further about policies and how to understand the impacts on children and youth in schools and other public spaces, we can recommend these books from the book list we provided you in the intro section of this course. In this lesson 4, we've surveyed current issues, laws, and policies impacting gender-diverse people in the United States. We've evaluated the impact of these laws and policies, particularly on school-aged students, and we've considered steps we can take to advocate for more supportive policies. As we conclude, we encourage you to take about 10 minutes to write some reflections on what you learned this lesson. Some things you might consider include, what is your sense of how policies and laws are impacting gender-expansive children and youth? What are some of the arguments and the facts about the ways discrimination is being codified into policies that impact public spaces like bathrooms or sports? How might you begin to support advocating for all children to have the opportunity to belong? Thank you for joining us for Lesson 4 in Understanding Gender Diversity in Children and Youth.